Hello everyone, this is Dr. Lashik, and in this lecture I'm going to go over a little bit about how to complete your literature review assignment. So just a heads up, this assignment is, in my opinion, the most difficult assignment in the whole semester. And it's not that it's most difficult and that it is time intensive, because it only is supposed to be 2 pages double spaced in length, so it doesn't take a lot of work per se. But we are looking for a very specific type of writing, and one that I hope this lecture will illuminate how to complete correctly. So please try to get this assignment done as early in the week as possible. That way you can forget about it for a couple of days and then come back to it to proofread it and maybe even take it into a place like the writing lab on campus or student support services to get it proofread before submission. Alright, so let's talk about literature reviews. And I'm sure by this point in the semester you're already at least a little bit familiar with what kind of information goes into a literature review. As we all know, it is the first part of 4 parts in an academic journal article, and its purpose is in its namesake. We are creating a summary of the literature on your topics of interest. But even more importantly than that is that the summary isn't just a hodgepodge of information on your topics of interest. Instead, this is information that provides evidence for why your hypothesis is probably correct. So if you've completed your topic proposal, you already have a written out hypothesis, and that's the hypothesis that you're trying to give evidence for why it is correct. And hopefully, if you collected the correct information for your annotated bibliography, creating this literature review will be very easy for you. So everything you write in your literature review needs to, again, provide evidence for why you think your hypothesis is correct. And also it needs to be written in such a way that anyone who's reading it, whether or not they have a background in science, can understand. So even people who are unfamiliar with your topic are able to understand what you were talking about and why you did what you did with your research. So I say right there in the second sentence, it says, think of it like you were writing this for your grandmother to read. So step 1, there's even a step before step 1. My best advice before you start this process is to read at least 5 literature reviews from various academic journal articles. It doesn't have to be on your topic of interest. It can be on anything. But the point is to see how what kinds of information is focused on in a lit review. And what you'll probably notice is that there are a list of common similarities between all literature reviews, regardless of the content. And that is what step 1 is all about here, organizing your annotated bibliography information. So very broadly, you'll probably notice after reading those 5 lit reviews that they all start by defining their abstract constructs. And this makes logical sense, right? If you're trying to demonstrate why your research is warranted, why your hypothesis is probably correct, you need to start from square one. And that means making sure everyone's on the same page at a definition for an abstract concept. One good way to think about writing literature reviews is that we are all pleading for grant money. So oftentimes researchers don't have the coin to be able to finance their own research projects completely out of pocket. And you probably got that sense already by this point in the semester, in that it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of patience, a lot of participants, and maybe even some fancy equipment to complete many research projects. And it's not likely that we all have the money sitting in our back pockets to do these things. So oftentimes researchers will apply for grants to be able to complete these types of projects. What granting agencies require is that the researcher has given them a literature review and a methods section, And the literature review, when pleading with a granting agency to get money, demonstrates to the granting agency that those researchers really know what they're talking about. They've done the research. They know everything there is to know on the topics of interest. And the research that they've done demonstrates why their hypothesis is probably correct. And then they move on to the methods section, which demonstrates to the granting agency that not only does the researchers know what they're talking about, but they have a very concrete plan on how they will accomplish those goals. So we're not quite at the methods section yet, but you still have to be able to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about with this information. And so that's what you're going to be accomplishing with this 2-page paper. So again, if you're again trying to demonstrate that you know everything there is to know about these topics, the very first thing you should do is define your abstract concepts. And for you in this class, since it's only a minimum of 2 pages long, you probably only need to do that for about 1 paragraph. So that's why it says, number 1, define your abstract concepts, approximately 1 paragraph. So that's, of course, if you are looking at abstract concepts. And you need to make sure to provide a cited definition. So for instance, let's say your 2 topics of interest for the final paper in this class is sleep and anxiety, and your hypothesis was that the more anxiety you experience on a day-to-day basis, the less sleep you get at night. So if that's your hypothesis and those are your topics of interest, and you've already collected all of the source information you need for your annotated bibliography, you have to start by including a definition of anxiety very early in your literature review, very early in that paper, because again, anyone who's unfamiliar with the topics should be able to follow along with what you're saying. And so you would say something like, well, according to so-and-so, anxiety is defined as this, and that is what we are going to look at in this paper as our definition of anxiety. The second part of your paper is the bulk of your literature review. And this is where you go over other research that has been done on your topic. And this will comprise about 3 to 4 paragraphs of your 2 pages of work. So this isn't random other research on your topics. This other research should provide evidence for why your hypothesis is probably correct. For example, again, if your topics are anxiety and sleep, you might want to look at other factors besides anxiety that affect sleep. So maybe you find information that says high stress affects sleep, taking certain medications affects sleep, workload throughout the day affects sleep. These types of evidence would then provide clues as to why anxiety is probably related to sleep as well. So again, even though that seems like a hodgepodge of information, how you talk about it in these 3 to 4 paragraphs should demonstrate why it provides support for your hypothesis, even if you have to spell it out for the readers by saying, the reason we talked about this is because it provides evidence for why anxiety is likely related to sleep, because ... And then finally, the very last part of your literature review should be the current research. This, like the first part, should be about 1 paragraph long. It's the very last thing you talk about. And when I say current research, I mean the research that you're looking at overall for your whole paper. So the relationship between sleep and anxiety in this case. If you know, because of your research for your annotated bibliography, that there is information and academic journal articles out there already that talk about the relationship between sleep and anxiety, this is where you would talk about that relationship. And if there is no information out there, you would say something like, well, because the other previous research on things like stress and workload, all these things affect sleep, it is highly likely that anxiety will also affect sleep in such a way, or is also related to sleep. However, if there is already research out there that demonstrates a relationship between sleep and anxiety, you might say instead something like, since this has already been found, it is very highly likely that we will find the same come to the same conclusions as these previous research articles have already done. And the very last thing you'll do in your current research paragraph is provide your hypothesis. So I would recommend writing a brief outline to help with the writing process. So go through your annotated bibliography information and then fill in the blanks for these 3 sections of your literature review. Decide what sources go to what, and if there's a big hole, like you may not have found any information or any definitions for your abstract constructs, you should go back into the literature and find one. Again, we have a minimum of 6 sources that are required for the completion of this paper, but you can have as many as you want, as long as they're all academic journal articles. One thing when organizing your work that is a big pet peeve of mine is that you're not making one paragraph per source information. So that's not how to correctly organize the information. You should be organizing your information based off of these three categories in step 1, which is current research, other research, defining your abstract constructs. This means you should be talking about multiple academic journal articles in one paragraph. So organize your work by idea, not by source. So maybe when talking about other research done on your topic and you're doing your work on sleep and anxiety, you might have a paragraph or 2 that talks about external factors that relate to sleep that are not anxiety. Maybe those external factors are relationship satisfaction and job workload and let's see, those kinds of things, other external factors. So that would be several different academic journal articles cited in that one paragraph. And maybe the second paragraph for research done on your topic would be internal factors. So experience stress, drug use on the brain, these kinds of things that might then impact sleep as well. So you want to organize your paper by idea, not by source. Step 2 is to begin writing, so you should have a clear idea of what you're supposed to be writing before you even sit down and start writing. Make sure as you write that you're citing information from a minimum of 6 peer-reviewed academic journal articles. Now that you've had practice finding academic journal articles on Google Scholar or PsycInfo, it should be easy for you to jump back into that if you realize you need one more academic journal article to help give evidence for something you're saying. And you should be able to find it pretty quickly and then include that in your work as well. So, of course, don't feel like you're limited to 6, feel like that's your minimum, and you can go over if necessary. Literature review should be 2 to 4 pages in length, double-spaced. 2 is the minimum, but and 4 is not the maximum. It's just if you're going far beyond 4 pages, you're probably overextending your reach a little bit. All of your work should be paraphrased, just like I said, when completing the annotated bibliography. So unfortunately, do not use quotes for this assignment. Like I said before, quotations are perfectly acceptable in other classes, but a big part of learning to write academic journal article type papers or APA papers is to learn how to paraphrase adequately, even hard information, difficult to understand information, which is why for your annotated bibliography, it should all be paraphrased. And if you paraphrase your paraphrased work, you are doubly sure that you're not accidentally plagiarizing when you write this literature review. If it is suspected that you plagiarized or there are quotes present within your paper, you will receive a reduced score for this assignment. Again, make sure to proofread for grammar and spelling mistakes. This is why I suggest doing it early and then sitting on it without looking at it for a couple of days and then going back to it and proofing it so that you've had a little bit of time to get away from those ideas for a while. And then finally, the literature review must be in APA style. This does not mean that you need to add a bunch of other sections to the paper. All you need to turn in is the literature review section. But what that does mean is that it needs to be formatted correctly. So right margin lengths, right margin widths Needs to be double spaced. You need to use APA language, meaning no using contractions or using I language. You need to do proper in-text citations. You need to be talking about the literature properly instead of referencing the journal article's title. You need to be referencing the authors who wrote it, etc. So those kinds of things when I say APA style. Again, if you're concerned about your writing ability, please, please, please utilize the resources on campus. And if you're off campus and cannot come to campus, there are other resources available. Just contact us, the instructors. But if you are on campus, you can physically go to the writing lab or student support services, and they will help you proofread your paper before submission. Another good suggestion would be, if you have contact information for your classmates, to trade papers and then give each other a little bit of notes before submission. And then finally, feel free to use the APA master document as a template to make sure that you get the right margin widths and the right spacing. But if you're going to do that, make sure to delete the unneeded sections before submission. So my rubric might be a little bit different than Dr. Crahey's, but this is how I've organized it, so it can kind of give you an example or an idea of what's very important to your instructor and what you stand to receive the most points for completing adequately. So the first criteria is organization. So you have logically organized your information. You discuss your abstract concepts and you clearly define them. You discuss literature on the topic that has been done already, and you discuss the current study quite clearly. And then finally, your hypothesis is clearly stated at the end. So you might do all of that perfect and you'll get 7 points on your organization. But if the information that you've provided, that even though it's well organized, does not help support why your hypothesis is probably correct, it's considered irrelevant information, and therefore you'll receive reduced points for the literature review criteria. So the information you're including is relevant and makes sense and supports your hypothesis. You actually cite a minimum of 6 sources and you include the minimum page length. APA formatting is just the in-text citations are done correctly, word choice, indents, those kinds of things. And finally, the writing criteria discusses your spelling and grammar. So again, it's clear that you have proofread your paper before submission, and that everything is paraphrased in your own words instead of quoted. All right, if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to email me or Dr. Crahey. Thank you.